it's about not taking silly risks, but taking risks that you know are achievable. They may be a stretch and they may be uncertainty, but you have developed that individual enough to be confident of their boundaries, and they will say, nope, I can't do that. I just don't know how to do that. Or they will say, yep, I can do that, but I might need you to provide me with X, Y, and Z. And that's why you want Maverick behaviour. You want someone who's flexible. And I know that the buzzword is all about being agile.
Welcome to the HR L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day. Tune in to discover what it takes to truly develop within human resources as we delve deep into growth, engagement, and leadership strategies that can unlock the hidden potential within your business, which we hope will really empower your workforce towards fantastic organizational success.
Hey guys, so we have made a few changes to the HR L&D podcast, which we hope you like. I know I do. I would love to know what you think of it. So if you can email me at nick@jgarecruitment.com, I would love to get your feedback. Similarly, if you would like to be featured on a future episode, or indeed if you have a specific HR or L&D issue you would like this podcast to tackle, then please do let me know. In return, I would also love it if you could just take an insy-wincy minute of your time at the end of this recording to like it, review it, and if you can, share it with all of your HR and L&D friends so we can make sure that together nobody ever misses a future episode. That would be hugely appreciated. Right, without further ado, let me introduce you to this exciting episode as I've had the opportunity to sit down with Judith Germain, who is founder of the leadership coaching business, the Maverick Paradox. Now, Judith is a fellow of the CIPD. She's a leading authority on Mavericks, and she is an author, leadership consultant, mentor, and podcaster. Since 2005, Judith has been working specifically with leadership teams that want to become more maverick in nature. Now, the Maverick Paradox builds and accelerates the development, so she uses a lot of the strategies from her book, which she wrote called The Maverick Paradox, the secret power behind successful leaders. So I'm going to be exploring more about that in this podcast. Judith works with companies that essentially need a maverick approach to their leadership because I guess what they have at the moment just isn't working. So I expect, like me, you want to find out a lot more about what this maverick approach entails. So let's go straight to it. Let's find out and enjoy the interview. I'm joined today by Jude. Jude, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good, Nick. Hi.
So I'm excited to be joined by Jude because she's a fellow of the CIPD and a leading authority on Mavericks. She's also an author, a leadership consultant, mentor, and podcaster. So I'm really excited. Now, she is also author of the book, The Maverick Paradox, and we're going to discover a lot more about that a little bit later on in the podcast.
L&D Podcast Discovery, questions to set the scene.
I wondered if we could first, Jude, if you could just tell us all what a maverick is.
I've been calling Mavericks willfully independent people since about 2005. And as you said about my book, I went into a bit more detail there. But a maverick is someone who's willfully independent. They have certain traits, like they have willful intention. So everything they do is because they've chosen to do it. They have an honest belief in something. So people sometimes think, oh, they're just really challenging. It's like they honestly believe they're right. So they're really going to go on with that. They're always influential. Now you have extreme mavericks who are manipulative. And then you've got socialized mavericks who are more influential, more in the influence side.
So from a business perspective, because obviously you're working with loads of businesses, you're trying to develop mavericks within businesses, very much of a leadership standpoint. You know, why are businesses coming to you for that with your maverick methodologies and why should they really consider developing more maverick behavior in their businesses as well? Tell me a little bit more about your work with businesses from a maverick perspective.
Yes, because initially people were, how on earth could you want more mavericks in an organisation? And I think what we're really looking for are more maverick behaviour, more people who are willing to challenge, to say, this isn't going right, or this is ethically wrong. Someone that you can trust and someone has integrity. And I found that over the years, what we have now, we have a lot of millennials, Generation Z, who are actually behaving a lot more like mavericks, and organisations don't know how to deal with them. they're at loss. And if you think like next year, they're going to be 50% of the workforce will be millennials. You know, the eldest generation Z are about 24. They've come in with much more maverick viewpoint. They're much more challenging. They will walk quicker than previous generations. And organisations are not set up for this. They're not set up for giving devolved responsibility to people who would have been considered in the past a low hierarchical rank. And those individuals require a certain amount of training and a certain amount of understanding to work with.
So at what point would a business, I guess, come to this realization that they're perhaps struggling to bridge the generation gap between, as you say, the baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, Generation Z? You know, when is it they come to you to say, actually, I think we've got a problem here. We need someone who can help bridge these gaps for us, help us prepare for Generation Z and Alpha. And they would obviously reach out to you at that point. But what is it that usually brings businesses to that point in realization? And then what can you do to help them bridge that gap?
Wow, thank you. That's a really involved question. I think quite often there's been a big change that's happened. So either they've cut some layers out in the hierarchy, they've merged companies together, they've brought in new teams, and then the individuals are in a situation where they're unable to cope. They're unable to deal with change happening at the rate that it's happening at, and they are requiring more from their leadership. So quite often the organisation is perplexed because the leadership isn't working, the one that they have, and that the status quo is no longer comfortable, or they might have a dysfunctional or high potential team, and they don't know how they need to guarantee that the change initiative is actually going to succeed.
That's kind of a theoretical viewpoint of where a business might come to you and say, okay, we recognize we've got this problem. What are the kind of tools that you'd put into place to help bridge that gap? What are the kind of practices that you've been able to implement that really help businesses?
One organisation came to me because they had what I would have traditionally called a junior management team, but their responsibilities are probably what you would have in the old days, more middle management. But they were quite junior. They were all millennials. So the eldest was about 40 and the youngest was about 26. And what happened was, they never got together as a team. So they had quite important functions that never considered each other when they were doing their work. So I was asked to come in and design a leadership development program that would provide them with senior management thinking skills and ability to work as a senior manager would do, but at this much lower level. So we looked at there's things like strategic thinking, creative thinking. They specifically wanted me to do a Maverick Leadership program, so get them to think in a more challenging way, who would be able to bypass bureaucracy, be able to network better, and to change the way that they saw change. So they were a bit excited with change. And what was interesting in this organisation, they had a new Maverick CEO. And of course, the whole organisation was shuddering because they didn't know how to deal with him, because he was like, right, we're in here now, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to move around. And they were like, whoa, this organisation's 100 years old, we don't move that quick.
Oh, I can imagine. Wow. That's a really interesting dichotomy when you're in a business like that is perhaps, as old-fashioned, I don't use that word, but maybe more traditional, that come, with a Maverick CEO that wants to change ideas. I can imagine that you're met with some resistance. So do you find that your fellowship with the CIPD, does that help with some of that HR perspective kind of approach, which you're going to need when you're dealing with any kind of transformational change program and when you're dealing with leaders? Do you find that being a fellow of the CIPD has helped you?
I think it's been helpful in terms of credibility, because I have a very maverick approach. And whilst when I was a HRD, I was a very mavericky one. And I think in terms of I've been a fellow and have been a fellow for so long, for so many years, provides some sort of comfort that there is actual rigor behind what I'm doing. But also I'm not a traditional HR person. So I always start from what is it that you want to achieve, and I'll design something to give the end result. And I'll spend a lot of time really digging into not I want a leadership program, but what is it supposed to achieve? How's it going to get there? What's the culture like? What do you need to embed? And then I will create something that will establish that. And I think for those where qualifications are important, I think they feel comforted that I have been a fellow, gosh, for over a decade. It makes me feel really old now. So I'm thinking, gosh, I'm old. Who's actually able to say, yes, whatever I design will not upset your HR department because I get HR and I get the fundamentals. Because I think I remember when I used to be in HR and say a company would hire somebody to come in to do something, and you didn't agree with their principles or the rigor or the background. So then you'd have a management team all shouting off about some new thing, and you're just like, yeah, but that's rubbish. Then you'd have to get them to unlearn it.
Sure. And actually, you know what? Within HR circles anyway, and particularly when you're dealing with change, credibility can be important. I think, knowing you've got that background, you've got that credibility, it allows you, I guess, to hopefully to make some of those Maverick ideas a little bit more implementable if people understand there's a background behind the method. I would love to know a little, if there's any stories you've got about how you're able to demonstrate your Maverick techniques, like when you're working as an HRD. You said you were quite a Maverick HRD. I would love to hear them. Are there any examples of, I guess, how you operate as an HRD that may have gone a little bit against the norm?
I was very much like an ops director in so much that I understood that whichever industry or whichever business was, I made a point of understanding how it worked inside out. And I mean the detail of how it worked as well as the industry. So I would be that person who would walk into marketing and we'll say, how's things going? And then we'll discuss the marketing campaign and why it isn't working. And I'd give suggestions on what might work. Or I would be in ops going, sales can't produce, because I'd know. And I'd be, so when people talk about being a business partner in HR, often what it means is HR brings its functional knowledge, and when it sits with the business, it discusses its functional knowledge. Whereas my Maverickism would be, I would train, I used to call them a responsible adult, into the department who would do the functional HR stuff, which would then allow me to really partner with the business and sit down. So it wouldn't be unusual that if the ops director wasn't in, I would run their part of the business for the holiday or something like that. It wouldn't be unusual. And that was quite mavericky because HR traditionally wasn't doing that.
That makes total sense. Well, let's bring it back to leadership. Obviously, your programs are a leadership methodology, so to speak. So how does your Paradox method differ from other models?
I find that leadership generally tends to be a product of the environment that it's in. Okay. So you have like action center leadership. It's for a certain time period, for example. Situation leadership is a time period. All the things, all the leadership theories over time has been to fit an environmental situation. Whereas Maverick leadership methodology is about who you are as an individual and what you do. So it recognizes that as an individual, you need to be one that is not just influential, but one that is trusted, for example. So we look at how do you garner trust? How do you deliver trust? We look at the essence of driven leadership. So that's the determination that you have, the reputation you have, the influence, how versatile you are, how you execute, because so much leadership isn't about execution, and how you narrate something. So if you need people to go there or do something, it requires a certain amount of narration. So you need to be able to. I say what Mavericks do is they always want to do revolution, but good Mavericks, socialized Mavericks, can take the revolution and explain it so it's an evolution for everybody else. Maverick-driven leadership really is that kind of 7-point plan, but it all works not on a consecutive basis, but at the same time, concurrently.
If I'm a learning development director or professional or even an HRD listening, what could you do to help my organization? Where where could I get you involved in my business to improve the leaders that I have perhaps working within my operation?
Probably 2 or 3 main areas. I think one would be if the leadership team is just not creating a great orchestra. So, if the team is unbalanced because there are distinct personalities in it, there are some functions that are overweight in the sense of, say, sometimes organisations run from finance, for example. So they're always looking behind. Or they run from marketing and always looking ahead. But they're not balanced. They're not looking at what's required. So if you've got a leadership team that is employing disengaged staff or going through rapid change, then I could help solve the issue. And it sounds a bit vague. It's because I work backwards. So sometimes the solution is consultancy. Sometimes it's training. Sometimes it's mentoring. I'll give you an example. Actually, I had an MD, a CEO that I'd worked with in different organisations over the years. And one day we were just chatting, just catch up chat, and he said, "Oh, we've just bought this company in Europe, and the owners run the business. Are still there, but we bought the business, but they're still there, and we want them to be there, but they're just not coming on board with what we need." And so we talked about it, and I said, what it sounds to me is that you could probably do with some consultancy to get them to understand the competition and how things are working, and then probably some training around leadership because the leadership isn't working as well as you would like. And he said, fine, okay, how long do you need? And I was like, what do you mean? Because I wasn't pitching, we were just chatting. And he just said, well, can you go and sort that out then? And I was like, well, yeah, I guess so. Shall I tell you what I'm going to do? And he said, no, I'm sure it'll be fine. And I was like, seriously? And he's like, yeah. Which kind of shocked me because I wasn't expecting that. But it meant that the solution that was provided, because once I found out, because I'm really good at answering questions, real issues of what they wanted, ended up spending a day or so on proper consultancy where we looked at the marketplace. We did a bit of, a Boston matrix, and we worked all the marketing the competitors, and this is where we need to be, and here's where we've come from, this is why it didn't work in the past. And then we looked at, right, now how do you take this team that you have to solve this problem? Bearing in mind, I didn't know exactly what problems it was that we were going to come up with. And I think it goes to what I was saying about reputation. So this other CEO knew me as because he'd only hired me before for training, various different types of training, leadership teams and boards and stuff like that. He didn't know me as a consultant or anything else. But in the conversation, he said, he sounds like you know what you're talking about, so I'll just leave you to get on with that.
I would imagine a Maverick takes risks anyway, right? So the Maverick personality, presumably, whether you'd always been a trainer or not, if you're offered an opportunity in consulting, I'm guessing from listening to this interview as we go along, it's something you'd probably have grabbed with both hands anyway.
Yeah, and it probably helped that he also was a socialised Maverick. So he asked me a few key questions. He threw some some theories in to see whether I know what he was talking about. And I did. So it was like, yeah, okay. But yes, and I think it's that you asked before about why would organisations want more Maverick behaviour. It's about not taking silly risks, but taking risks that you know are achievable. They may be a stretch and they may be uncertainty, but you have developed that individual enough to be confident of their boundaries, and they will say, nope, I can't do that. I just don't know how to do that. Or they will say, yep, I can do that, but I might need you to provide me with X, Y, and Z. And that's why you want Maverick behaviour. You want someone who's flexible. And I know that the buzzword is all about being agile. And that's what it is. If you've got a bunch of employees who think like Mavericks and work like Mavericks, then they'll be very agile.
Great. Well, we're going to find out a bit more about the Maverick Paradox and your book, Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders, in part 2. Before we do, we're going to find out a bit more about yourself, Jude, if we can.
Time to find out more about you.
So, who are the 2 people who have been the most influential to you in your career to date?
I do actually know who they are, and I had the pleasure of telling one of them a few years down the line, which was fantastic. The first person was my first real boss, who was a Maverick, And he was influential because I joined an insurance company, again, you know, hundreds of years old insurance company, very traditional. And I'd come on as an admin person. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do this for long because this job looks really easy. So I discovered that if you did the work really quickly and you started moaning that you've done all the work, people started to teach you how to underwrite. So I was a commercial underwriter to begin with. And within about 6 months, I was given 5 million underwriting limit, which was unheard of. Because, you know, I was 17 and normally you're a manager and you'd been there like 15 years. But my boss was a maverick and you just say, yeah, just keep going. Yeah, you're doing all right, keep going. And then I remember one day he said to me, you know what, I'm never going to promote you. And I was horrified. I said, I'm your best, because I must admit, I was 17, okay, so a little bit unsophisticated. And I said, I'm your best employee. What are you on about? And he said, yeah, you are, but I can't be going through this anymore. And I said, what are you on about? And he said, well, because you upset people. He goes, you're fine, then you upset someone, and then I have to listen to them crying for 2 days, and I've had enough of it. And I said, P, but they love me after the 2 days. It's okay, I can always sort it out. And he said, yeah, I know, but in that 2 days, I have to deal with all the crying, and I'm not doing it anymore. And I was like, oh, I was really shocked. Because what it was is like, because Mavericks are really brutally honest. And at the time, I hadn't learned to be more tactful. So if somebody said, am I good at my job? And I thought they weren't, I'd say, no, you're rubbish. And I couldn't understand why they'd get upset. Because if someone said that to me, I'd go, oh, really? What do I need to, I wouldn't be upset. I'd be like, what do I need to improve? So, I was really blunt, really, really honest, but really, really blunt. And I didn't know it was hurtful because it wouldn't have hurted me at that time. So he was very influential because when he said that and I respected him, I thought, gosh, if he's saying that, I really need to change. And being the Maverick, rather than doing a traditional learning, I said to myself, how do I get what I want without upsetting people? So then I went and studied things like persuasion and influence. And before I even looked at leadership, I went like transactional analysis and body language, and I went all around the soft skills areas before training up on the other side. So that was good when I was 17. And it was a great lesson to learn when you're only 17. I'm meeting many Mavericks now who are 50 who haven't learned that lesson. And the second person was, funny enough, in the same organisation, and again, another socialised Maverick. And what happened, the insurance company, it was about the time that Direct Line had entered the market, which meant they completely changed the way insurance worked. So rather than having specialists, you had this phone people up, talk to them on the phone, and they would give you a quote. And it was like completely different. So the insurance company I was in decided to go the Direct Line way. So they was getting rid of all the specialists and putting them into call centres. Anyway, so I was brought up into head office, and I was hanging around at the lift, but to go to lunch. And this guy, I recognised and seen him. There was this guy, and he's probably about 10, 15 years older than me. And he said, what do you think of this new idea? I hadn't realised he's one of the architects of it, or that he was a director of the company. I had no idea. And I said, I think it's a bit rubbish. And he said, why? I said, it's not working. And he said, do you believe you can fix it? And I said, yes, I believe I can. And he said, okay, I'll give you a month to go off and do some research, come back and provide a report for the board, and we'll see what you've got to say. So I was like, sure, because again, I was only about 21 or 22 at that time. So I remember going to my boss and saying, I'm not doing this anymore because I met so-and-so in the hallway and I'm doing this project now, which of course he didn't believe me. So I phoned them up and then they said, yeah, and he went, oh, okay. And that's what I did. I went off, did some research. I got some people from different parts, because we had different people from different parts of the country all coming into the head office. So I had different people. I got together a team. We did all this stuff. I did the report. And the organisation completely changed the way it ran. But as a Maverick, it was like, well, of course, I came up with a better solution. So of course they would change. Did not understanding how radical that itself really was.
Because they gave you those opportunities so early in your career, on that advice so early in your career, do you think they really set you on your journeys to where you are now? Like without those two big influences, perhaps you'd have taken a different path? Or do you think your path was inevitable? You just maybe got there a little bit quicker due to the opportunities they gave you?
It's a really good question, because I think your first real job really sets the pace, I think, of where you're going. And I'd always had responsibility from a very early age. But I think I'm sure my life would be extremely different, because the first guy taught me to consider other people. So I would never have been an extreme maverick, but I certainly wasn't a socialized one either. And I just thought that if you tell people the truth, then that's good. Never thought that the truth can hurt people. Had never even considered it. I think a maverick needs to hear something from people they respect and people that they see who are more intelligent or equally intelligent. So I think if somebody else had told me, I would have ignored them. So, so I think I might well have been a very different person. And I think the second guy, he enabled me to demonstrate a different way of thinking and allow me not to feel constrained into the insurance industry. So because I had done that, I then ended up being seconded into other head office departments where I were, for example, giving advice to people who used to do a different type of insurance than I'd even trained at, who were 30 years older than me, and me saying, I've read it all, I don't agree, this is what we're doing. And, so to have that kind of senior management responsibility at the age of 20, 21, it's just, I think that in itself kind of gives you the confidence that the next job, because my next job from that insurance company was in HR, but as a HR manager with no experience in HR whatsoever, and only an associateship of the CIPD at that point.
Sure, but it sounds to me like you've got a lot of confidence in your own abilities, and you rather than shirk from it, you embrace it and go for it. And credit to you, because a lot of people would shy away from those kind of opportunities, or they'd miss them without even knowing they've been presented. And how many opportunities that pass people by, they don't even know an opportunity as it presented itself. But actually, if you say yes a little bit more, then it's amazing what doors can be open. It sounds like you've been very successful as a result, which is fantastic, and have delivered as well, which is kudos to yourself. So outside of your career trajectory, I guess, are there any sort of major resources that have helped you on your journey? So not necessarily given to you or supported you, or opportunities provided by managers or people, but are there any particular books that you've really been inspired by, or is there music or any other kind of resource that's really helped pull you through?
Wow. Your questions are pretty cool, aren't they? I think I'm pathologically curious. So I am always learning, always interested, always reading, always finding out what's happening, always, and I think that has helped enormously, because I don't look just, I don't just go, right, I'm a HR person, I look at HR leadership, but I look at everything. So it's really good, because then connections are very easy to make, because, you saw this on the news, and then that linked to that, and that linked to that. I think some of the things that made me really change in terms of leadership, there was a book written years ago, I think he's changed the title of the book now, by John Maxwell, that says something like leadership is influence, or something like that. And he's got this quote where he says, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And that would probably became the real starting point of me going, leadership, influence, I get it, and work from that way. Completely changed the way I looked at leadership. I remember thinking, that's different. Simon Sinek's stuff made me go, because I remember looking at his stuff in 2005 before people saw him as an overnight success in 2015. Which I think is quite funny. But yeah, I thought his stuff is quite good, because it moves leadership onto the individual, and he also recognizes that leadership isn't something you do to people. Leadership is something that you are. You are a leader. You're not a title. And I like that. I think I got a bit of an aha moment way back in the early days looking at transactional analyses. I know it sounds really broad, but understanding how people play games with each other, and how people put themselves into victimhood, or how people can bully you and put you in that scenario. So I think it certainly helped in being objective, because when you're listening to what people are saying or observing what's going on, you can see what kind of drama is being played out and you're not emotionally attached to it. So I think it allows you to be very objective. And then you can honestly say, I see what you're saying and I think this is what you want. Is that right? And then going for that rather than the emotion and the argument and the pity me that sometimes people play. And because Mavericks don't have a lot of time for pity me's as it is. So it's quite good to understand, to be able to go, I'm not going to get stressed about that.
I'm quite keen to ask you this next question because I think it's, as a Maverick, I'm quite keen to what your answer would be. If you could be given any superpower, what would it be and why?
Let's see. The first thing that popped out into my head, and I was just trying to censor myself, but the first thing that popped up was being invisible.
That's cool. Anything goes, right?
And I'm thinking, why? I'm trying to think why. But I don't know, maybe it's just because if you're invisible, then you can see how things really are, rather than what things people think they are.
I like this question because you get two different types of responses. You get the responses where people either try and go deep and meaningful and think, what can I use for good? Or you get the other response, which is more like the first thing that comes into your head, like, I want to shoot ice from my hands. And people say, why? I just think it'd be cool. So it always gives an interesting response. I like asking it. My last question before we jump back into finding out more about your book, which I'm really keen to do. If you could invite 3 people to a dinner party, who would they be and why?
Gosh. You didn't tell me these questions were going to be so tough.
This is tough to narrow down, right?
Yeah. I think one of the Obamas. I don't think I'll be overly fussed in particular which one, whether it be Barack or Michelle. I think they'll both have an interesting conversation. Stephen King. I love his way his mind works. It sounds really silly. I was going to say Einstein. I think those 3. I think a really interesting conversation would come. I think because Einstein, they feel like he had Asperger's, didn't they? So I think he would think. So obviously he's intelligent, but I think he would see things in quite a different way. And then I think the Obamas are very kind of like the socialized Mavericks thing. They like to all about change, but it's all about the greater good, and they're quite objective. And Stephen King, I did actually, funny enough, meet Stephen King years ago. I really love his work, and I waited out for hours to meet him at some book signing in London. So I think I was number 6 in the queue. I think I was there at 5 o'clock in the morning or something silly. And because we were really early, when we went to meet him, we actually had quite a lot. Each person had a really long conversation before the bookshop said, hang on a second, Mr. King, you've got like thousands of people outside. You can't talk for 20 minutes for each person. And I remember listening to him in the Royal Albert Hall where he did a reading, and he kind of made up this story, and I can't remember it, but I remember it was something like he'd made up this story where all these things had happened when you got onto the tube. And when he finished, everyone sat there and nobody wanted to get up. I always remember that. It's like everyone's going, I'm too scared to go to the tube. Everyone's too frightened. And people were going, which tube station are you going to? Can I walk back with you? Because everyone was he'd actually scared us all silly. And then he was like, okay, I'm off now. And we were like, right, we're just sitting here now because we're too frightened to get up.
Some people just have an aura, and they have an authority and a gravitas to hold a room. It's amazing. I'd love to have been in that Royal Albert Hall listening to Stephen King. It must have been a phenomenal experience. Well, it kind of leads us in nicely. We're talking about one author to another. Let's talk about yourself and your own book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can any recruiter understand my HR recruitment challenges? Please don't give up on your hiring challenges just yet. Here at JGA HR Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting and retaining top human resources talent. We also understand just how costly a poor hire can be. JGA HR Recruitment would like to partner with you to help you overcome your hiring challenges. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more. The L&D Podcast. Final questions to help listeners engage, learn and perform.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what this book is all about?
Well, this book looks at how leadership works. And I looked at Mavericks and thought, Mavericks are fantastic leaders, even the extreme ones, except for they don't lead for the good. And how does a socialized Maverick manage to lead really well? So I looked at the essence of the Mavericks, so the different types and the different types of people. I looked at their attributes, the strategies that use, and also things like utilizing power. So I was thinking to myself, if I had to train someone to be a leader, what are the key things I'd want them to know? So I'd want them to know how to utilize power. I'd want them to have certain capabilities. I'd want them to be able to work for the greater good, and I want them to be able to think in a way that enables change to happen and change to happen well. So that's what the book's about, really, is what is it? And I think what's the power behind leaders, I think, is that paradox. And the paradox of the Maverick is the Maverick gets hired to put in rapid change. Something's not working, bring the Maverick in, get them to fix it. Problem is, especially if the Mavericks has done this a number of times, is they do it very, very quickly. And once they fix the problems they hired for, they go around like little drones trying to find other problems to fix. But the problem with that is that you're now walking into other people's departments and going, you know why this is not selling? You know why this isn't working? And that upsets people. And then people start to pull away the power. So you hire the Maverick to fix it, and then eventually you start to dismantle what they've put up to take the power away from the Maverick, and it can cause a lot of problems.
You talk as well about in your book about 5 Maverick attributes that all, in quotation marks, natural leaders would possess. So what would those 5 Maverick attributes be?
I think we briefly talked about it before. One of them would be the willful intention. So if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it regardless of how you feel about it. You'd have an honest belief. So when a socialized Maverick is arguing about something because they honestly believe it to be true, they're not playing games. So quite often, socialized Mavericks will be a devil's advocate, but they're doing it to bring out challenge, to be sure, is this really, we're going for A or we're going for B, making sure the decision is right and everyone's certain, not because they don't like you and want to cause problems. And they will keep going to the point of losing their job if they honestly believe they are right. They've got a lot of integrity there. Influential, they can get almost anybody to move. Knowledgeable. And when I say knowledgeable, I mean, this is beyond the knowledge that you would get in a department. So you'd expect them to be an expert in whatever field they're supposed to be doing. And then what a Maverick then does, or what a good leader would then do, is say, what are the things that impact on this? So let's say HR. You have HR. So the person's in the HR role and they know HR. So they're good at HR, they're good strategists, everything you expect them to do in HR. And then they look and they say, right, okay, what impacts on HR, or what does HR impact on? Okay, it could be on ops. So what is it that we need to do for ops? And then they'll become an expert in operations. And they go, okay, then they'll become an expert in something else. And then they can make connections. So they become knowledgeable, not just in a wide area, but also deep in those areas. And the last two really is all Mavericks are execution and output driven, which basically means if it isn't going to be done, there's no point in doing it. So, they're not a talking shop. So if you've hired a Maverick, they want to complete the task that's been set. And they are success driven. So they want to be not necessarily personally successful, they want the project or whatever it is you're doing to be successful, which is why they can be quite challenging.
Is there someone that you would highlight as being a particularly good example that perhaps all our listeners can relate to, of who would, have all of these 5 attributes that perhaps in the public eye, they will go, now I get it. That's a really successful, strong Maverick, social Maverick leader, if you like, that you would, that people may aspire to be similar to. Is someone out there that kind of ticks all those boxes in the public eye?
Yeah, I think I would have said Richard Branson in the past, in the sense that he ticks all those boxes, And whilst some of his endeavours would have not have been successful, they drove success in the next endeavour because he learnt from it. But I think it would be certainly fair to say that President Obama would be a socialised maverick in the sense that he would be looking at those things in the constraints that obviously he had.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, look, that leaves us to the last two questions before we open the L&D vaults. First is just a really simple one. There may be nothing to answer here, which is if I put yourself in my shoes, and obviously you're an experienced podcaster yourself, Jude, so put yourself in my shoes for a moment. What's the one question that you would have asked yourself that I haven't asked you already?
Why working with me enables an organisation to be successful?
Great. So why then working with you would make an organisation be more successful?
I think the answer there would be I always begin at first principles. So whenever an organisation comes to somebody, they have a very defined idea as to what they want and what the solution is going to be. And I always dig much deeper than that to find out the entire picture and all the variables and things that hit. And then I design something, whatever the hybrid solution is, that hits all of that. And I embed certain themes. So if, for example, the organisation said there's a huge trust issue, people don't trust the managers, or the staff are disengaged, or the team is not a cohesive team. But even if I'm not asked specifically to deal with that, I design through exercises or through consultancy to ensure that those end themes are embedded and brought out. So at the end of whatever it is, they become an organised, trusted team that enjoy working with each other, even though they are not specifically given modules or something in that area. So, and I think because of my experience, where I've worked in a number of industries, in a number of roles, and I've led lots of departments other than HR, I'm very good at seeing the connection and saying, well, like you've got a company that says, we can't schedule staff. And I'll say, well, if a supermarket can schedule 1,000 people 24/7, I'm sure you can schedule 30 people Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Or it's that kind of, because you've done so much in so many different areas, you can bring in so much learning from other places.
Fantastic. And last question before we open the L&D vault. What does HR mean to you?
For me, right, I guess what does HR mean? HR for me is the hub of an organisation that has no axe to bind, that is all about ensuring that success happens through the effective use of people. So I've always said HR to me is a bit much like a volleyball game. So you've got the HR is almost like the umpire that can see above the net. And you've got management on one side and you've got employees on the other side, and they're playing volleyball. Sometimes you have to come down your stairs and pick up the ball from management and go, no. And you give it to the staff and you go back. And other times you go to the staff and you go, no. You give it to the, because it's that kind of ability to be 100% objective and put the best interests of everything together. So it's almost like you hold all the stakeholder interests. And I don't think HR can possibly succeed if it does not understand the business it is in. If you're HR in retail, understand retail. If you're HR manager, understand. Because how can you add anything to the senior management team if you don't understand what they have to do? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Great way to finish the question of the podcast. And of course, I will put links to the Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power and Successful Leaders book in the episode notes. So if you're interested in finding out more, check those out, click the link, and it'll take you straight through to the page where you can purchase a copy for yourself and read at your leisure. And I'll also put links in there as well to various other sites that if you want to check out more about Jude's work, you can find them there. So we're going to open the L&D vault.
Opening the L&D vault.
In hindsight, Jude, what's one thing you know now that you wish you'd known when you began your career?
I think I would have avoided an awful lot of hurt for myself. I would have carried a lot less hurt if I understood that you can't care more for the organisation than the organisation cares itself. I think so. Certainly it took many years to understand that even if there was a right solution and the company didn't want to do it, I shouldn't kill myself over it. I used to spend a lot of time being very not hurt because they didn't listen to me, but like really hurt that things weren't working when they could have been working.
Sure, and I totally get that, particularly with where you are now. I mean, you would have probably seen these things earlier and quicker than perhaps other people would have done. And I totally get that. I can 100% see why that would be something that would frustrate at the time. What's the one common myth you often hear in the workplace in relation to leadership, and can you debunk it?
Nobody needs development because they're all natural leaders, because they've managed people for years. It's often the ones with the most amount of harassment claims against them that says that, mind the way.
I can quite imagine. No, that's fair. That's cool. And last but not least, before we close the podcast, what is the one piece of advice you would give to someone embarking on a career in HR?
Learn about business. So work out how business works. What does marketing departments do? How does finance work? What does IT do? Learn about the business function so that you can have a conversation about the business. Because if the FD is talking to you about profit and loss, make sure you understand what profit and loss is. And I think really understand how the dynamics of people. How are people influenced? What are the dynamics? I remember in my younger stage, after being told that I'd never be promoted, learning about things like team dynamics, the room dynamics, what happens if you sit there, what happens if you say this, the importance of your words. I think you should know, you should take as read, you should know HR because that's your job. You should know, you should know the law and employee relations and all that, but know people. Why do people do what they do? How do you influence people? If HR is ever going to sit on the board or sit on the senior team and really add value, then you need to understand what your presence is doing.
Fantastic. Well, a great way to close the podcast. Well, look, before we finish, I'm going to quickly ask yourself, Jude, if you can just let our listeners know where they can connect with you online. Are there any social sites or profiles or websites you'd like to highlight?
I'm on LinkedIn under Judith Germain. Yeah, I think I'm the only Judith Germain who's got that in the profile link. I have a Facebook fan page, also Judith Germain. You can see a theme here. On Twitter, I'm Maverick Mastery, and Instagram and Pinterest, it's Maverick_Paradox.
Fantastic. And if you want to find out more about Judith's work as well, you can go to www.maverickparadox.com, where you'll find links to her podcast, her books, and more materials as well. Well worth taking a look if you want to find out more about how you yourself can become a Maverick leader for the future. So fantastic podcast. Thank you ever so much for joining me today, Judith. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, if you are an HR or L&D professional listening to this podcast right now and you have an HR, L&D or HRIS related vacancy that you would love some specialist recruitment support with, please do get in touch with me. I'd love to help and show what a great HR recruitment experience feels like. And you can contact me myself directly at nick@jarecruitment.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening, folks. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'll look forward to bringing you the next episode of the HR L&D podcast real soon. Thanks again, Jude.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much for tuning into HR L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA HR Recruitment. If you need help with a current HR, payroll or L&D vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favourite podcast channels. Till next time.